Hello, this is Rick, K6VVA, the Locust, with a look at the big picture of expedition operating and the direct relationship to antisocial pileup behavior. That's a mouthful, huh? This is an expanded version and title change of the presentation I made for the 2012 Central Texas DX Contest Club session at Austin Summerfest and at the 2013 Visalia International DX Convention IOTA Dinner. Now, unless you've been hibernating in a cave or have had your head buried in the sand, then you're aware that international goodwill and friendship, for decades the gold standard and hallmark of amateur radio camaraderie, has taken a major hit. When it comes to the DX highway and operating in the pileups, including IOTA, international goodwill and friendship has gone down the toilet. The line from a famous movie says it all. Houston, we have a problem. And that problem is ham radio's dirty little secret, doggy doo-doo in the form of antisocial pileup behavior being spread across the ham radio bands. Reality check. Denial is not a river in Egypt. Fortunately, there is a solution for every problem. But in order to solve any problem, we must first identify the cause or causes of the problem. Several years ago, I was privileged to join a small international group of mostly well-known DXers and other very experienced expeditioners, including some fellow FOC members. There were 10 of us in a sort of small group brain trust, with focused discussions of on-air pileup operating behavior and principles involving the DX Code of Conduct. Some members of the group had also participated in formulating the DX Code of Conduct for expeditioners, as well as the educational content for DX University, a guide for DXers and DXpeditioners. With regard to expedition operating, we had much discussion and a lot of analysis of behavior observed in expedition pileups. Some of us made stereo MP3 recordings of actual pileups to analyze. We identified cause and effect relationships based upon what the expedition operators did or what the expedition operators did not do that always resulted in predictable, unnecessary chaos and confusion, leading to antisocial pileup behavior. In every case, it was always due to a major lack of operational consistency, especially with major expeditions. As we discussed the observed shortfalls in expedition operator procedures that always resulted in predictable antisocial pileup behavior, we also formulated new operating strategies designed to hopefully mitigate the common problems. My next 4 expeditions in a 9-month period also became on-air experimental laboratories to test and then evaluate the results of trying the various new strategies. I'm thankful for the great opportunity to have been a part of this small group, as the experience has helped me to be a better expedition operator. I now make MP3 audio recordings of my entire expeditions and also keep a diary of my observations while operating for post-expedition review of any new ideas and to fine-tune and retweak anything for the next expedition. But I've had a second vested interest in the process, in anticipation of the mother of all pileups, involving my proposed CW-only IOTA expedition as P5/K6VVA. I'm aware of 5 other competing groups seeking P5 license approval, so it will be interesting to see who gets there first. Stay tuned. In discussing the observed and escalated antisocial pileup behavior with a number of other expeditioners as well as pileup participants, collectively, some of the problems appear to be a reflection of societal degradation on a global basis. But I also have a second theory as a contributing factor, and this is based on the principle of compound interest. Now, in the financial realm, compound interest is a positive thing. As the interest on principal grows and grows and grows, the resulting financial gain is a welcomed outcome. However, when the DX highway becomes a pileup, then anger, frustration, and hostility build up in many callers for reasons I'll be discussing. So when there are back-to-back expeditions that take place, or multiple expeditions active at the same time, here is my theory. These internalized emotions and feelings are never fully processed before the next pileup. So the residual anger, frustration, and hostility compound as they grow, and grow, and grow, and grow into what sometimes manifests as on-air road rage and outpouring of profanity, even on CW and in cluster system postings. We need to break this vicious cycle. It needs to stop, and it needs to stop now. International goodwill and friendship needs to be restored to mitigate the doggy doo-doo that keeps being spread across the ham bands. Reality check. You're probably familiar with the expression, life is too short for QRP. I say, life is too short for antisocial pileup behavior. If you look at the ages of ham radio operators who attend DX conventions, see QRZ.com photos and Expeditioner photos, it does not take a rocket scientist to see that DXing is now primarily an old folks' hobby. This includes IOTA chasers here in the USA. And sadly, the SK, silent key factor, is accelerating. So as most of us old-timers are now in the sunset period of our lives, wouldn't it be nice if everyone in the DX world and IOTA world could look forward to living out their few remaining golden years in a golden angelic ham radio paradise filled with DX and IOTAs, but without antisocial pileup behavior? With human nature being just that, it ain't going to happen. However, we all have a duty and a responsibility to at least attempt to restore some international goodwill and friendship on the ham bands, especially on the DX highway. We didn't have a psychologist or psychiatrist member of the small International Brain Trust discussion group, but I'm confident that if Sigmund Freud would have joined us, he would have written volumes about the mob mentality and the acting out of deep-seated emotional and mental problems by some of the callers repeatedly observed in the pileups. It would have been nice to also get Freud's opinion on the outward manifestations of what I call HWS, Hungry Wolf Syndrome, which has afflicted most callers in the pileups. I think most people will agree that fear, the fear of not making a desired QSO in any pileups, is a primary factor driving the outward expressions of antisocial pileup behavior. Most antisocial pileup behavior is the result of dysfunctional interrelations of what I call the Big Five. Number 1, callers on the expedition frequency. Number 2, zero-beat up cops. Number 3, idiot tuner-upper lids. Number 4, psychojammers. And number 5, the profanity peddlers, both on-air and in cluster postings. But what is the main cause? Primarily, it's the expedition operator. There are 10 factors contributing to unnecessary antisocial pileup behavior. Number 1, failure of the expedition operator to always send up after each and every QSO when operating split. Our analysis of pileups revealed this to be a primary cause of antisocial pileup behavior. OMG, such a simple thing to do. But far too many expedition operators simply don't understand the big picture of what happens on their own operating frequency. Expedition operators need to realize that there are casual operators on the bands. Some of these folks may only turn on their rigs once every 2 or 3 months, and believe it or not, actually turn their VFO knobs in search of DX, like many of us old-timers used to do back in the good old pre-cluster days. Many of these casual operators are non-cluster trolls and don't subscribe to any DX newsletters. Expedition operators who mistakenly assume that every caller uses the cluster system and or has read about their expedition in advance via a newsletter or website makes a very serious mistake. Expedition operators need to also understand that all DX chasers and IOTA chasers on the ham bands are not the sharpest cards in the pileup deck. A few words about on the expedition frequency callers. Many of these are innocent casual operators who happen across a DX station working split who sends only TU at the end of a QSO. Knowing that one cannot always hear the other station being worked by a simplex expedition operator, any reasonable caller is going to jump right in and call on that frequency after hearing TU and nothing else. The fact that too many expedition operators start off or always operate simplex is another problem. So as one or more of these innocent callers start calling on the expedition operator's frequency, assuming it's a simplex deal because of the lack of up, immediately arrive the up police, usually loud zero beat on the expedition operator's signal. Now the up police actually do provide a useful service, except they also generate zero beat QRM right on the expedition operator. And why is it that most up cops use straight keys and have terrible fists? Many I've heard can't even send the 2 letters U and P without screwing up. As this circus sideshow unfolds, the anger, frustration, and hostility builds up in pileup callers and then manifests with increased incidence of profanity peddlers appearing to spew forth vulgarity via Morse code or shouting on SSB, as well as in cluster postings. It is predictable and unnecessary repetitive insanity, and it is always the clueless expedition operator's fault. Fortunately, there is a very simple solution for this dilemma. Expedition operators just need to program their logging software to always send up after each and every QSO when working split. Duh! This is not rocket science. Some expedition operators say, but I mostly use my paddles to send CW. Huh? Newsflash! This is a human brain, the most powerful and underutilized supercomputer in the world. The expedition operator who fully understands the big picture of expedition operating and the direct relationship to antisocial pilot behavior only has to program his human supercomputer to always send up at the end of each and every QSO. Expedition operators, wake up! Failure to send up after each and every QSO on CW or indicate where you are listening on SSB is the primary cause of antisocial pilot behavior. Number 2, failure to ID frequently. OMG, another cause of antisocial pilot behavior. The following brief summary is of a real-world case study in our small brain trust group. There was an Eastern European expedition to a Pacific island. To best describe what I personally observed on the air by one of the expedition operators, it would be horror show. This expedition operator made QSOs for 30 minutes with no call sign ID. In my opinion, that was total foolishness and irresponsible. Also, the expedition operator rarely sent up after every QSO. To make things worse, there was another similar call sign expedition to the Pacific at the same time, and many cluster postings were made for the wrong expedition. Most likely, some QSLs came back as not in log. Predictably, during the 30-minute period I monitored, there were many call ? Queries made 0 beat on the expedition operator's frequency and in the Pileup. Of course, this brought out the angry, frustrated, and hostile profanity peddlers as additional QRM on the expeditioner's frequency. This horror show could have been avoided if the expedition operator had understood the big picture of expedition operating and the direct relationship to antisocial pilot behavior. As a sidebar, one of our small group members was a prolific promoter of the DX Code of Conduct. He had previously spent many hours diligently contacting the organizers and team leaders of announced upcoming expeditions, asking them to incorporate the DX Code of Conduct and the DX Code of Conduct for expeditioners. This is why we all started seeing the DX Code of Conduct logo on the majority of expedition websites. He told us there were only 2 situations where the DX Code of Conduct was refused. Guess what? The expedition in this case study was one of them. And the reason given? The expedition operators said they had their own operating ethics. They sure did. And in my opinion, those operating ethics were basic lid, which caused the anger, frustration, and hostility in some Pileup callers to mushroom and the unrestrained to act out their anger and frustration as antisocial Pileup behavior on the expedition operator's frequency. Some experienced expeditioners suggest giving the call sign ID after each QSO. While this is an admirable goal, especially with a short call sign, many of us believe that every 3 to 4 QSOs is reasonable. On CW, with a long call sign like K6VVA portable KL7, often followed by an IOTA designator, IDing after each QSO is not very practical. On my last IOTA expedition, I did test a few periods with a call sign ID every 5 QSOs, but then observed several unidentified stations inside the Pileup start sending call ? That seemed to be the edge of the envelope. Number 3, failure to turn the VFO knob. One of the most frustrating things to Pileup callers, especially little pistol stations on sideband, is to hear the expedition operator say, listening up 5 to 10, but always leaving his VFO on 5 up. Failure of the expedition operator to turn the VFO knob on CW yields similar results of only the loudest signals getting worked. Yes, size does matter when it comes to RF, and this causes anger, frustration, and hostility to build up. And when someone sends call ? On the expeditioner's frequency, antisocial pileup behavior is often followed by profanity peddlers. On sideband, it's very easy for the expedition operator to remedy this situation by increasing the indicated listening range as long as the operator actually turns the VFO knob instead of leaving it stuck on one receive frequency. Spreading out or up a CW pileup is not so easy. The JA operators are very good about frequently moving up above the main pileup crowd, giving the expedition operator who does turn the VFO dial some less QRM call sign availabilities. European callers tend to stay huddled together in a cluster. So when most caller signals are weak with heavy polar path QSB, what I mostly experience up in KL7, experimentation of methods to try and spread out the pileup on CW remains a work in progress. On my last KL7 IOTA trip, I gave advance notification of what I planned to do on the expedition website. I sent up 1/3, up 2/5, even spelling out up 1 to 3, etc., along with up wide or spread out, but sometimes to no avail, and I learned firsthand that not every caller is the sharpest card in the pileup deck. The savvy operators seem to catch on quickly, but not the majority. So with this item, each expedition will continue to be part of an on-air experimental laboratory agenda. Number 4, failure with partial call signs. There is some controversy among expeditioners and expedition team leaders on this subject. Some suggest only responding to a full call sign. Depending on the composition of a pileup, and if callers are not spread out sufficiently, the majority of us believe that responding to partial call signs can help keep a better rhythm flow in motion. If pileup callers do not hear the expedition operator sending or saying something on a timely basis, then what I call anal anxiety, cranial confusion, and pulmonary pulsing can fuel the underlying fear of many pileup callers that they won't be able to make a QSO. But there has been a major problem with the operating procedure used to work partials that contributes to unnecessary QRM and ultimate antisocial pileup behavior. On CW, most pileup callers use QSK in order to stop sending when the expedition operator resumes transmitting. However, a 1x2 call sign suffix sent only one time at 35 words per minute comes out like a blip on the radar. Even with QSK at a slower 30 words per minute, most pileup callers will only hear the last couple of dits or daws sent by the expedition operator. Reality check. Human nature being what it is, the majority will resume calling again, perpetuating the same QRM in the pileup that originally QRM'd getting a full call sign to begin with. A suggested fix by one member in our small group was to send the partial call 2 to 3 times. What a brilliant idea! This would allow callers QSK to shut off and copy the partial sent by the expedition operator at least one time. So I made another expedition to test out this new strategy. Having pre-programmed an F key on the confuser to now send a partial call sign 3 times, here's what I was pleased to observe the very first test. As the logger sent the partial 1 time, there were many callers still sending who would not have copied it. After the 2nd time, there were far less stations calling. After the 3rd time, there were few to none, and it was very easy to get a full call sign of the station I originally responded to. And almost everyone knew what was taking place. Bingo! I later changed the F key to send a partial only 2 times, but found this still yielded acceptable results. This is a critical factor with QSB and weak signals, and benefits both the expedition operator and all pileup callers. Sending a partial call at least 2 to 3 times should be every CW expedition operator's mantra, and is even more important on sideband because there are no QSK capabilities like with CW. In any event, when responding to a partial call, the expedition operator must persist to get the full call sign at least 5 times or more, regardless of out-of-turn caller lid QRM, or until the partial signal fades into the local noise, and to always send nil at least 2 times before taking any new callers. More about out-of-turn caller pileup lids in a few moments. Number 5, sending too fast in words per minute. The expedition operator must be an effective communicator regardless of conditions. Reality check. The average speed of most callers in a pileup is less than 30 words per minute. The CW expedition operator must understand that many callers may have heavy QSB polar path problems trying to copy. Then there is the issue of code readers. Independent surveys have indicated approximately 15% of all pileup callers use these devices, which are heavily affected by QSB. Estimates are that hearing aids are also in use by another 15% of all pileup callers. Many of those in a pileup are QRS operators well below 30 words per minute. And when signals are weak, and if the expedition operator sends too fast, all these factors combined add up to a recipe for pileup disaster, with the resulting fallout being antisocial pileup behavior. The expedition operator sending at 38 words per minute is either arrogant, ignorant, or both. The sideband equivalent is speaking too fast, especially if the expedition operator has an accent. All pileup instructions require a QRS in words per minute on CW and QRS speaking on sideband. For CW, the recommended optimum effective running speed is 30 words per minute or less, and a further QRS when signals are weak with QSB. All expedition operators need to remember that not every caller is the sharpest card in the pileup deck. Again, this is not rocket science. It is common sense. Number 6. Responding to out-of-turn callers. Expedition operators must never respond to out-of-turn callers. Never. If they do, the hungry wolf syndrome will be fully unleashed in the pack, and like sharks who smell blood in the water, the pileup callers will realize that the expedition operator has lost control of the pileup, and more out-of-turn calling will take place, along with unnecessary chaos and confusion, leading to full-blown antisocial pileup behavior. There are 3 major geographic areas of pileup callers: Europe, the USA and Canada, and Asia, primarily JA. It's time for a straight talk reality check. Based upon my involvement with the Small Brain Trust Group, many discussions with other experienced expeditioners, my observations as a participant in many pileups, and as an expeditioner myself on 10 expeditions in the last 2.5 years, I can say that with a few exceptions, JA operators are the most polite and gentleman callers in the pileups. The USA and Canada have far too many out-of-turn caller pileup lids. European operators in general are the most undisciplined out-of-turn pileup callers. I really get tired of hearing expedition operators saying, "Europe, stand by, Europe, stand by," but Europe does not stand by. The highest percentage of European out-of-turn caller pileup lids have call signs that begin with the letter I. Unfortunately, these are the observed facts. When anyone is on the DX highway, even if it looks like this, it makes absolutely no difference what country any pileup caller resides in, or what the local cultural customs are in that country, whether that be driving above the speed limit, cheating on taxes, or even cutting in line for theater tickets. International goodwill and friendship requires that everyone behave as a gentleman on the ham-bands, especially in a pileup on the DX highway. The expedition operator is the primary traffic cop on the DX highway. So when the expedition operator responds to a full call sign, a partial call sign, asks for callers by the numbers, or a specific geographic area that is not even close to your call sign or area, international goodwill and friendship dictates that you need to stand by and wait your turn. Let me repeat this again. When the expedition operator responds to a full call sign, a partial call sign, asks for callers by the numbers, or a specific geographic area that is not even close to your call sign or area, international goodwill and friendship dictates that you need to stand by and wait your turn. Act like an adult and show self-restraint. Unfortunately, many operators in the pileups behave like whining little babies with no patience and toddlers in need of potty training. This is a pair of wire strippers. Wouldn't it be nice if we could have a similar pair of lid strippers to easily strip away all the out-of-turn caller lids in the pileups, especially the call sign prefix only and suffix only lids, along with the geography lids? A recent observation of antisocial pileup behavior was while I was listening to an expedition operator asking for JA only during a limited opening period to that geographic area. He was unfortunately working simplex, QRMing the JA callers each time were voices screaming, Sudamerica! Sudamerica! As well as prefix-only lid callers from that continent. And par for the course was one Italian lid operator in the mix, continually shouting his suffix only. Like with those busted for driving under the influence of alcohol, it's too bad we can't arrest all out-of-turn caller lids and send them immediately to lid jail. Some out-of-turn caller lid behavior is due to a violation of this critical item in the DX Code of Conduct, which is, I will only call if I can copy the DX station properly. But sometimes an expedition operator is also to blame. When working by the numbers or geographic areas, these pileup instructions must be repeated after every QSO. Let me repeat this again. These pileup instructions must be repeated after every QSO. The expedition operator who fully understands the big picture of expedition operating and the direct relationship to antisocial pileup behavior realizes that, like hungry wolves, the pileup callers hang on every dit and daw or word on sideband. And if he fails just one time to always repeat the instructions, callers from all areas or numbers will start calling again. That is the reality of things. A word about tail ending. Decades ago, back in the good old days, proper tail ending is how many of us cracked the pileups. But expedition operators should never respond to pileup tail enders, because in the cluster world of today, this will only lead to chaos and the resulting antisocial pileup behavior. Some out-of-turn caller lids in the pileups are newcomers who need some training. This is where exposure to the DX Code of Conduct, as well as the detailed educational materials on the DX University website, can be of great benefit. Others developed bad habits listening to chronic out-of-turn caller lids I call bully lids. More about these reprobates in a few moments. Reality check. Being human, at some point everyone will unintentionally screw up and make a miscalculated or ill-timed call in a pileup. It has happened to all of us at least once. In the game of golf, there's something called a mulligan. This is like a do-over or a second chance. So considering that the majority of pileup callers are now senior citizens, it may be reasonable to grant all pileup callers 1 or 2 mulligans per year. That's per year and not per pileup, and except for those I have appropriately labeled as bully lids. And just by coincidence, that brings us to number 7, not confronting bully lids. Bully behavior is a major problem in the world today, and not just in the DX and IOTA pileups. And the tragic consequences of bully attacks are that teenage victims of bullying often commit suicide. In the world of DXing and pileups, bully lidism is really unsportsmanlike conduct toward other competitors on the DX highway, especially when it looks like this. But that is not an excuse for bully behavior. In the world of pro sports, bully lids would be quickly thrown out of any game or put in a penalty box. Let's look at the profile of a bully lid. A bully lid is a perpetual, hardcore, out-of-turn lid caller in pileups. A bully lid is arrogant, self-centered, selfish, with a me mentality, and has absolutely no self-restraint. The operating principles in the DX Code of Conduct have fallen on deaf ears and are of no interest to the bully lid. If you stop and think about it, a bully lid is actually a type of pileup terrorist who attempts to hijack QSOs away from the more deserving. The bully lid epitomizes antisocial pileup behavior. Unfortunately, most bully lids have big signals. Many observed are number 1 DXCC honor roll, on the IOTA honor roll, and sadly, some here in the USA are directors and officers of well-known ham radio organizations. These are the same people who should set a good example for others to follow, but who never learned that good sportsman conduct applies to any playing field, including the DX highway, even when it looks like this. A true story. Several years ago, there was a huge expedition pileup on 40-meter CW one morning. Regardless of what full call sign or any partial call sign the expedition operator sent that was nowhere close to his call, one well-known DXer kept calling and calling and calling out of turn each and every time. Well, after hearing 20 of these out-of-turn calls in a row, I sent him an email suggesting that his out-of-turn calling did not set a good example for others, and made reference to the DX Code of Conduct for his review and study. This was the essence of his email reply. How dare you criticize my operating style? And besides, I know some of the expedition operators. Huh? The fact he claimed to know some of the expedition operators was no excuse for his chronic out-of-turn calling. He did have an operating style, all right, and it was hardcore bully lid. In discussions with fellow expeditioners, some suggest ignoring bully lids, but I disagree, and here's why. The innocent in the pileups deserve an advocate, and that is a responsibility that belongs to the expedition operator. I've always been impressed by expedition operators who persist to try and complete what they started with any caller, and I made a vow to always try and follow this myself. There are also situations where bully lids cannot just be ignored. Here's an example from my recent IOTA North America 152 expedition. With 770 JA QSOs in my log, unfortunately, there were 4 JA bully lids who were not gentlemen operators. Their bully lid tactics were to immediately zero-beat other stations I just responded to, whether involving a full call sign or partial call sign, and start calling over the top of their fellow JA. Here's an audio clip of one of these zero-beat JA bully lid encounters. That particular JA bully lid, a JA6, was dealt with during a subsequent episode when I was able to accurately copy his full call sign. He received one of my new responses to bully lids, which is to QRS in words per minute, and send the bully lid call sign 3 times, followed by QRT, QRT, not you, SK, SK, and then restart the pileup with either up or CQing. Guess what? Everyone in the pileup knows who the bully lid is, and other bully lid and out-of-turn callers QRT, and the pileup starts behaving. The QSO rate goes back up, sometimes for an hour or more, until the next bully lid shows up to be dealt with. So with those who won't follow the DX code of conduct with their operating, when nice doesn't work, bold action is required. If I am fortunate to operate as P5/K6VVA on my proposed CW-only IOTA expedition, EU stations especially need to understand all bully lids will receive my bully lid on-air QRT message. Everyone in the pileup will know their bully lid call sign, and audio clips of all bully lids will be put on the official expedition website after returning from P5. That's how it's going to work. So I want to encourage my fellow expeditioners to put on your big boy pants or big boy island shorts, grow a pair, and begin to confront bully lids on air. Those who play by the rules will thank you. But wait, there's more. Number 8, the expedition team leaders, also often the expedition organizers, contribute to antisocial pileup behavior. The most common problem with all expeditions is a lack of consistency in on-air operating. The expedition team leaders must have accountability to ensure consistency of on-air operating by all team members. There can be no rogue operators, like in the example mentioned of the expedition operator who made QSOs for 30 minutes without giving a call sign ID. Team leaders need to be real leaders and fully understand the big picture of expedition operating and the direct relationship to antisocial pileup behavior before setting foot on a boat or a plane to a DX location. They are also responsible for any operator training needed. Number 9, the funding organizations. You may have heard the expression, stuff flows downhill. In this case, it's not only finances, but the accountability for the responsible use thereof. And as stewards of all the other people's money that's been donated to the funding organizations, as a prerequisite to obtaining any expedition monies, funders need firm commitments that an expedition will operate on air consistently with proven strategies that reduce antisocial pileup behavior. Funders also need to monitor the on-air expedition operating. For funding organizations to give thousands and often tens of thousands of dollars for an expedition group to come back and say, look how many QSOs we made, but would disregard for the piles of doggy doo-doo spread across the handbands in the form of unnecessary chaos and confusion that led to rampant antisocial pileup behavior, causing international goodwill and friendship to go down the toilet in the process, is irresponsibility from the top down. So before forking over money to any expedition, funders need to ensure that the team leaders and all expedition operators fully understand the big picture of expedition operating and the direct relationship to antisocial pileup behavior before a single penny is doled out. Last but not least, number 10, operating simplex. Simplex is bad, a very bad idea for expeditions. Simplex is evil. And don't you just love it when trying to copy a weak 449 expedition signal working simplex, while the expedition operator is hammered by loud S9 plus zero-beat cluster trolls and all the nonstop calling, that even if the expedition operator decides to finally start working split, that you can't copy the QSY info? In today's cluster world, operating simplex almost guarantees an instant lid fest, or what some cluster posters often refer to as a zoo. I call it the ultimate cluster cluck, and it is always unnecessary. So when it comes to expeditions, the admonition is to always start and operate split. The one exception? Contest expeditions, for obvious reasons, because working split would cause even greater chaos and confusion on the handbands. Sharp CW contesters are the most disciplined operators in these forced simplex circumstances. Notice the absence of any antisocial pileup behavior in the following audio clip example from when I operated as VP2 VVA in the 2009 ARRL CWDX contest. That's the way it should be in all pileups. Adults behaving like gentlemen and waiting their turn. It's called good sportsmanship even in competition. No antisocial pileup behavior. And thanks to everyone's self-restrained non-lid operating, I also benefited by winning the first place world single operator 20-meter CW category. That's what can happen when everyone plays by the rules of international goodwill and friendship on the handbands, even in the pileups. Thanks again, guys. Conclusion. The increase in antisocial pileup behavior is destroying our hobby. So what are the solutions? How about this one? A competency test for expedition operators. One salient question on such a test would certainly be, do you understand why it's absolutely necessary to always send up after every QSO when working split? As I've said before, this is not rocket science. Rather, all expedition operators, all team leaders, all expedition organizers, and all expedition funders need to fully understand the big picture of expedition operating and the direct relationship to antisocial pileup behavior. And if they do, there will be little future need for the loud zero-beat up police that always QRM the expedition operator and the resulting additional fallout. In reality, the ultimate cop and traffic officer in a pileup is really supposed to be the expedition operator. When it comes to the problem of all those zero-beat lids tuning up on the expedition operator's frequency, how about this idea? ITF, International Tuner Upper Frequency. One designated frequency in each of the CW, digital, and sideband mode portions of each band is legally allowed. Now, wouldn't that be nice? However, I would still get irritated as heck watching the S-meter increase 10 dB while listening to all the USA amplifiers being tuned up on 30 meters to 1500 watts or more. And how about some psychiatric help for all the jammers, psycho posters to the cluster system, the bully lids, and P-rats? You know, those nasty pirates. Education is part of the solution, but will only work for those with an attitude of willingness to learn. Here in the USA, about 10,000 people now retire each day. This also means many old DXers will be back on air as employment careers end, and all the money saved to build their dream superstation will result in even more loud signals and QRM in the pileups. It will be imperative that as many of these folks as possible inculcate the DX Code of Conduct into their on-air operating. Those with dreams of being DX need to absorb the wisdom in the DX Code of Conduct for expeditioners, and everyone can benefit from the wealth of operating materials available on the DX University website. DX University live seminars are also a highly recommended source of education. Here's how to do your part to help stamp out unnecessary antisocial pileup behavior. Do some personal observation, especially right at the start of any new major expedition that shows up. Leave one receiver or VFO on the expedition operator's frequency and listen in the pileup with a second radio or VFO. You'll get a real education as to the seriousness of the overall problems. From pileup to pileup, you'll hear a lot of newcomers who need to receive some education. You'll also hear many of the same bully lids perpetually calling out of turn. So then be proactive. Do everyone a favor. Write down the call signs of all blatant out-of-turn callers you hear, and then email each of them the DX Code of Conduct and DX University website URLs. If you don't feel comfortable doing this, then at least invest in some envelopes and stamps, and snail mail a copy of the DX Code of Conduct and URL to the DX University website. You can do this anonymously. There are no laws that I know of requiring you to include a return address on an envelope. Buckle up and have some serious one-on-one discussions with chronic out-of-turn callers and bully lids you know. Be prepared for some resistance and rationalizations for their lid operating behavior. But one thing is for sure, to sit back and do nothing is a real cop-out, and things will just continue to get worse. So we all need to do our part to try and help restore international goodwill and friendship back on the DX highway, even when it looks like this. So unless you've had your head buried in the sand during this presentation, now you know the big picture of expedition operating and the direct relationship to antisocial pileup behavior, along with a few other things. Disclaimer: some of my expressed viewpoints and rhetoric may not reflect those of all members of the small group Brain Trust.